Um, Jona, um, tell us about your experience.
I'm going to try in the short period of time that I have. I'm kind of like Jabari. I came in the mid 80s, during a time where pretty much I was the only African American in the room and the only woman in the room. So let me just kind of paint a picture of my journey shortly here. Guys, when I started, I thought I wanted to be a CPA in my early part of my life. And I started working for a bank. And two things that I noticed that I did not like was office politics amongst women. And I was managing millions of dollars and not one dime of it was mine. So I had a problem with that. So I went home and told my husband at the time, I was like, I have to find a different type of workplace where it's all men. And that was my mindset at that time because I couldn't deal with the cattiness in the office. And so I want to work with all men, but you can look at me and tell I'm not the hard hat, shovel digging type of girl. So I'm a girly girl. So I was looking for something that I could do, and IT was an area that I researched. And so I went to vocational school and got hired straight out of vocational school because a technology company had gotten the largest contract in the city of Houston, which is the HISD, Houston Independent School District's technology contract to upgrade every single computer memory-wise in the district. And I think he was in over his head, so he came to the school and got a lot of us out of the school. Again, only female, only black. And so that was my journey in hardware, but in desktop. With that position, I ended up being trained by older Caucasian men. Now, the language that I endured in my on the entrance level of my career today would not be acceptable, HR, and things like little girl, because he was like a grandfather to me. What happened with desktop? I was the individual. You guys remember the days? Let me take my young people back a little bit. Remember the days when you used to see the guys walking down the street with pulling their little toolkit with them and going into the building to repair the computer? Well, I was that person. I would come across IBM. We call them the blue guy, the blue suits. And you would see them walking down the street. Well, I was one of the first African American women working for EDS, Raytheon. Well, EDS bought out Raytheon and so forth. So, guys, that was my journey. I had a area downtown, and I just went from building to building. I would walk in, and they would be shocked because this girl's coming in with these colors, these nails. But this older gentleman internally taught me a lot. He taught me how to repair computers at the board level. So I could get on site and diagnose the problem and, find me a little place off in the corner somewhere and solder the board and do what I needed to do to get the computer back up. So I loved that for a while. But then what happened with that initial contract, when I got brought in, I was working with all guys. And so I walked into this room and it looked like a guy's locker. And so, everything was everywhere. There was no order of parts coming in, parts going out, and, all of that. And so I spent a couple of days with the guys, and they trained me on what I needed to do because, again, I'm coming out of school. And the owner of the company came in on the second day that I was there, and he was like, Jona, how do you like it? What do you think? And I told him I loved it. It was exciting, and the guys were training me and teaching me everything. But here's what I said to him. I said, do you mind if I stay back a little bit? I just kind of want to reorg and just kind of organize. I said, yeah, have at it. And the guys were like, have at it. So the next day when they walked into the room, I had organized the entire office. Everybody had their own cubby. There were in and outs for parts. Everybody had their names by the desk, and we had trash. Because they had it looked like lunch for 2 or 3 days was still on somebody's desk. So it was just like that. So what happened when he walked in and the guys walked in, everybody was looking around like, oh, wow. So the owner of the company then introduced me. He said, gentlemen, meet your new project coordinator. That started my leadership role. And from there, I was able to go from company to company, going from project lead, project coordinator, project manager. I've been head of PMO, program manager. Jahari, I actually worked for Consumers Energy when they implemented the full SAP application at Consumers Energy several years ago. I lived in Michigan for 8 years, so it was funny that you said consumers energy because I was there for 4 years on a 4-year SAP implementation. I was the project manager for development, all of development for that. Wow. And so that's kind of crazy to meet someone like that from that era. But that's a little bit about my story because I also want to share. I want to get into the diverse piece. As I went from company to company, the way I elevated in position was based on my boss. Every time my boss was promoted, he took me with him. I was always his project manager, his project lead. And so I've had some very great experiences, but probably more different than you thought. I primarily the first 10 or 15 years of my 25-year career was all non-diverse, and I absolutely love it. I don't remember any unkind words, any, none of that, because these guys basically took me under their wing, taught me everything. When they went up, I went up. I love telling this story because there was one position that I was working for a VP, and I was his program manager. I handled all of his projects, and he was getting promoted. And so when he asked me, he said, "You coming, right?" I was like, "Yeah, I am." And he asked me what would my salary be? And I told him, and it was $20,000 more than what I was making at that time. And he was like, "I don't know if I can do that, but I'll do my best." And so needless to say, he went up, I went with him, got the money. So later on, I asked him, I said, "How did you make that happen?" We started having a conversation. I said, "How did you make that happen?" He gave up part of his salary so that I could have what I wanted to bring me on. Now, something that I learned early on in that role was I would find out what they didn't like to do at that level. A lot of executives, most of my directs for the last 10 years or so have been vice presidents, directors of divisions, and I'm usually their project manager. So what I would do is I would find out what it is that they didn't like. I became an expert at it. And so when they got to a point where, I really don't want to do this, I got you, and I would go in and I would do it. And so it kind of put me in a real good position with them. Now, when it comes, as I got in probably the last 5 to 10 years, my experience has been with more of a diverse community. And I will say, and I'm honestly say this, is that I had more challenges in that as I took on people of color as employees and so forth and so on. Then I got well, you guys know what happens is in that situation, it's like, okay, now you're management and we're not. And then they want the hookup and then they want the cover and they want I started getting a lot of that. Never had to deal with that before. So I kind of had to get some coaching in that space because I came up in the mid 80s and I'm so used to being treated and respected a certain way. When the industry, I guess I'll say it that way, when the industry became more diverse, it was a little bit different for me. Because now all of a sudden I have to deal with people that look like me, not necessarily liking the role that I'm in. How did you get there? Oh, you must have done something, blah, blah, blah. So, I had to take on a lot of that, but I didn't care. Just like, the gentleman that called me the little girl, come over here. Let me show you how to solder this board. I didn't care. I got my foot in the door, and it was very endearing. He was like a grandfather to me, so I didn't see it as offensive. But again, it's not something he could say today. But to deal with the diverse area, I was shocked at first because, again, I'm being sheltered. I'm in this non-diverse thing, and then all of a sudden we get an influx of melanated people coming into the industry, and I'm an executive or I'm a leader, right? And so I had to deal with that part, and that was a little bit of a transition for me. So I'll stop right there, but I have a ton of stories of that.
Let's move on to the next question.
Yep.
Which kind of rolls into what you're talking about there. Patrice, I see you got your hand up. If you got a question, you can funnel that into Sherry on the chat so we can kind of keep this thing rolling. So this next question, how do you think it's impacted you and your professional journey as it relates to diversity? How do you think that impacts you? I'm gonna go back to Jahari on this because I want to hit Jahari